Hi, Jodah.
Hey, Dan.
I like your sign. The one
I
on the
know
wall
you.
behind you?
I know you would. I knew you would.
You
Yeah,
did? Why didn't you tell
yeah.
me you're going to put that sign up?
Because I wanted you to be jealous.
Well, I'm jealous. You were effective. You made me jealous. I want a sense and signal sign.
I know you do. I know you do.
Everybody wants a sense and signal sign.
Yep.
Don't you?
Yep.
Don't
Yep.
you? Watching us on YouTube or listening to us on Spotify or Apple, just make sure to like us. Nobody likes us. It makes us feel lonely out here in the internets. So like us, like us, like us, like us. The Sense and Signal podcast with Jodah and Dan. I'm Dan Tarker, and I come from higher education, and this is my co-host.
I'm Jodah Jensen, and I come from someplace. I don't know anymore.
Yeah, he doesn't. His mother dropped him in the woods somewhere in Oregon, and he just grew up by himself. But I am going to think about that sense and signal sign on your wall all night long, Jodah, because it does make me jealous, and I'm just going to ruminate and ruminate and ruminate while I drink myself into a drunken stupor.
Jodah always tries to upstage me with his signs on the wall. Jodah and his signs, his precious little signs from Joanne's Fabrics. I could have gone to Joanne's Fabrics, but Jodah didn't tell me. He wanted to upstage me. He wanted to show off how better he was than me. Make everybody wonder, what's wrong with Dan? Why doesn't Dan go to Joanne's Fabrics? I know what you're trying to do. I know. It might be the middle of the night, but I know what you're trying to do. I know.
Well, it is a sign worthy of jealousy. I think so, but I also think it would be really cool if we actually could find somebody to talk to about that rumination problem you got. I mean,
We
to be
just
able to
talked to Tina
unload.
Greenbaum. Didn't we talked to Tina Greenbaum today? I mean,
We
you're
did.
gonna be watching it later,
Yeah,
audience, if you're actually
yeah,
out there.
yeah,
But
yeah.
she
We
was great.
did. Yeah, no, she was amazing. Great conversation.
She's
Um,
going to be talking about rumination and emotional self-regulation and leadership and spirituality and how to ground yourself and control your thoughts in a very stoic way when you're a leader under crisis, which I think most leaders in our late COVID period could benefit from.
yeah, no, I think so. It was a very fruitful conversation that I think a lot of you are going to really enjoy. Definitely check it out for sure.
Yeah, check it out right now because it's coming right up. So, Tina, it is wonderful to have you here. And we're going to get into your resume and curriculum vitae. But I want to start off by asking you what's your favorite movie about leadership?
It's one of the space ones. I think it was Apollo 13, I believe.
Okay.
And I at one point I had found the clip and the photos, and I can't remember his name, of the captain who was manning. When they were going, they were very frightened that
Right.
the spaceship was going to collapse and explode. And his level of leadership, his level of calm, and at the same time very clear. You do this, you do that. No room for questions, no room for anything. He was in total control, is what it looked like, and certainly gave, I believe, everybody else that probably was panicking that sense that somebody was really in charge. I could
Nice.
have done better research on his name, but
Yeah, and I know the movie. And I know what you're talking about. And I think it's going to be a theme for this particular episode because I think a lot of what you're probably going to talk about, based on my understanding of research into what you've spoken about before in terms of leadership, is a lot around emotional regulation and how to stay calm and in control and clear minded in turbulent situations.
you got it. That's it.
So, how did you become a leadership coach, and what was your pathway? And I guess also, where do you find motivation in pursuing your path toward being a leadership coach? And you know, we talk a lot on this podcast about the importance of meaning and purpose in our work. as something that is a motivator. So where do you find meaning and purpose in your work as a leadership coach? I know it's kind of a lot of different questions wrapped into
That's
one,
okay,
but
but it has a theme. So
yeah.
I started out I'm a social worker by training and a clinical social worker. And social work, a lot of people don't know this about the profession, but it is the interface between the individual and their environment. Whereas strict psychology a lot is much more intrapsychic and doesn't really kind of deal as much with the environment.
Right.
And so it's very practical for me. And when I started out working with women with eating disorders. And I tell the story, they were very ill, very angry, very much at war with everybody. But they had no skill. They could tell me about their mother, their father, their sister, their brother. They could tell the insight part. But when it came to actually, how do you deal with the stress? How do you deal with the anxiety? How do you deal with life, basically? They really didn't have any skill. And so I was handed a manual that said alcoholism and a marker, and my supervisor says, cross it out. And they put eating disorders, and then they said, go. Well, as I tell in my TED Talk that I just did, I like being really successful, and I was so not being successful. And they were stuck, and I was stuck. And so I got my first clue at a yoga studio where I was doing the first time I had ever done yoga, and I got into that posture of that shavasana where you're lying there and your body's really calm and your mind's really clear. And I said, wow, if I could just get these young women to do this, maybe they wouldn't need their eating disorder. And at the time, I had no idea how to do that, how to get from the mind to the body and how to calm people down and so on. But what became a theme for me was, how do I help somebody change at a fundamental level? Because the body gets triggered before the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so every course that I took, every CEU that I had to take, it always had that theme of like, how do we do this? How are we really, really put together? And then as I started to progress in my career, I was always drawn to people who were big minds, is what I like to say, big creative minds who had a lot of impact over a lot of people. And as in any profession, I'm sure your professions as well, you're drawn to certain populations, drawn to certain things that kind of get you excited. And the idea that somebody was a successful business person, they figured out a lot of the finances, and yet they were coming to me for a lot of the emotional support. And so I like business, and I started over 5 different times, all the places that I just told you that I lived. Every time I moved, I started another private practice. And so I got really good at starting private practices. This was before the internet, before you could take people with you. And so this combination of business and leadership and complicated problems became an area that I'm a problem solver. I'm a strategic problem solver. And that always captured my attention and gives me the greatest challenge. And then you asked me how, in terms of like, with the passion that I have for it. Well, the higher that I can get up in terms of the leadership chain, and they buy into this, what I do, then that filters down to an entire organization. And then the entire organization, well, we've got moms and we've got dads and we've got grandparents and we've got generational stuff and we've got, the whole stream of society.
So it all trickles down.
It all trickles
That makes
down.
that's awesome, and that resonates with a lot of the thinking I've been having in this past couple of years. I think you say that you sort of now are specializing in these leaders, these people, these thought movers, or and you're sort of focusing on how to actualize them to get them past themselves, probably, or something, in that regard, or maybe own up to themselves. I don't know. You tell me, right? That's what you're here for. But what are there any distinctions, any special distinctions that you can highlight around dealing with these leaders that might be different than a non-leadership sort of position? Does it change at all? I mean, they're all human, right? Wherever you are on that spectrum.
We all have issues. We all have blind spots, but there is something about somebody who is sort of that natural leader that then can be spruced up and be a great leader. So people can learn leadership at every single level. But just like any other art, emotional intelligence is very high in great leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I like to say, a lot of times they get very frustrated because they can see things so fast. They can see steps, like chess players. If you do this, then that's going to happen, that's going to happen, that's going to happen. And they get very annoyed sometimes that people can't keep up with them or don't see the world as quickly as they see it. So again, if we go back to that Apollo, the guy who was in charge of the Apollo, he could anticipate so much before other people could. So
and part of that was because he had the training and he knew the systems and
that's right. He knew
the technology.
So the two things go hand in hand. So I love sports psychology and I love sports, and I've worked a lot with athletes. And if you have two athletes or two leaders or anybody that have the same level of knowledge, but this one has a stronger mental game, this is the one that's going to win. This is the one that's going to come up top. We just finished watching the U.S. Open a couple of weeks ago, and I just love to listen to the commentators and watch the players. And this one's banging his racket with a tremendous amount of talent, tremendous depth. But this is not yet, managed and harnessed to the best of his ability.
Yeah, my little anecdotal story of that is I'm from California and originally from Los Angeles, and so I have for a very long time had
and don't hate him for that. Don't hate him for that.
I know the rivalry.
But I was Laker fan, recovered since, but I was a Laker fan for a very long time, and I think a lot of basketball people who listen to this will probably take offense to what I say, or probably challenge this. But I always thought exactly what you just said. I thought the Lakers were always a very talented team, but they would lose against people who wanted it more. They didn't have to be as good. They just had to want it more. That when it came to the mental game, that the Lakers would win, as long as they were technically more talented than the other team, and there wasn't a mental game aspect to it, they'd win. But as soon as it became one of heart, mental sort of chess, I always thought they'd lose.
Yes. Yeah. And so it gets proven over and over and over again. So the question then becomes, of course, well, how do I excel? Given I'm with so many people with so much talent, what is going to make the cream rise to the top? And that's the part that I love. It's not like you're not already great, but I have one little motto that, is we make your best better. You're already great, but what are those points that could just up your game just a little bit?
Right. Yeah, and you've come to this place where you're at as a leadership coach through a lot of grief and a lot of hardship yourself, right?
Yes.
And I imagine all of that has informed your approach to coaching leadership. And do you mind talking a little bit about that? How your own personal struggles have helped helped you develop an understanding of leadership?
So I think it starts out kind of with what I was saying. From the time I've been very small, I have been a leader. It's just very easy for me to see what has to be done. And at the same time, there's a statement, in group dynamics that every group wants a leader and every group wants to kill the leader off.
It's true.
So I say that you have about as much room as a crease on a pair of pants in order to be able to be that leader that people actually really want to follow.
Can I say one thing? I've had both emotions for the same person. I'm like, it's like you. Yes, I totally get it. Yeah, exactly.
Love and hate.
Right. Yep. I've always had to kind of watch my mouth as I, through the years where I was, because anytime I would see an injustice, I would just go nuts and not very diplomatic and so on. So I think I've always had this aspect. People, my friends would always come to me with problems, and it's just been my role. It's kind of the way that I'm wired. And then as difficulties would hit, now again, I had wonderful parents. I really did. And they had a lot of common sense and they taught me a lot, but they didn't they didn't know, and they certainly didn't teach me the things that I know now in terms of how to manage these emotions. I had a very difficult father, so it was trying to please him. And in sports, I remember in summer camp, I was swimming so hard, I went right into a wall. My father was watching me because I wanted him to be proud of me. So we all have patterns that we create in childhood that impact us as grownups. And so what I had to kind of learn, as anybody who's interested in transformational work, is what are those blind spots that everybody else sees that you don't see. And being a woman, doing too much, boundaries not really, really tight, having people want to like me, and all those things that I had to go through. And then when things got really, really bad, I had a very, very difficult marriage. I had breast cancer. I lost my parents in a car accident. I have 3 boys, and they had their own issues and I could, kind of go on with the things that were really, really, really difficult. And I think I'll use the example when I lost my parents, and I was extremely close with my mother. She was my heart. I say she was not a perfect person, but she was a perfect mother, because she was emotionally intelligent. She was never wrong about people, which is a really scary, scary thing. So when I lost her, I was devastated, but at the same time, there was always a kernel inside of me that I knew I would be okay. As bad as it was, and it was bad, that sense of, I'm going to get through this. And I've always had that, no matter how difficult a situation has been, this belief that somehow or other, I'm going to pull through. And then once I get to the other side of it, and all the learning that I gathered, and how did I get through that? How did I get through that? The death of my parents and my very, very difficult divorce. And how did I do that? Well, once I figured out how I did it, then I could teach it.
Yeah.
And what I did learn, I could never teach it when I'm in the middle of it, because I'm not that person that people can depend on. And I mean, I am, in some ways, but that the strength of a great leader is, and I learned this very, very early in graduate school, is they're always outside of the problem. So in other words, my first client was this very big young man who was terribly, terribly depressed, and I had to record my session so that I could play it for my supervisor.
Yeah.
And I played it for her, and she said, "Oh my God, Tina, you're never going to survive in this business," because I was just as depressed as he was by the time he left. And
Yeah.
she says, you always have to be outside of the problem. And
Yeah. There's. Are you familiar with the book "Adaptive Leadership" by Heifetz?
No, I'm not.
He uses this analogy, I think, that speaks to what you're talking about, of the balcony versus the dance floor. Mm-hmm. And the leader has to get up on the balcony, and you don't want to get sucked down into the dance floor, because you won't be able to see the bigger picture once you're waltzing with everybody else in the organization.
Right. That's exactly right. So what happens to us emotionally when we don't have that level of consciousness or awareness, we're in it. We're in the problem. We're on the dance floor, and we cannot see. And we can't really be very helpful, because now we've got a whole group of people that are feeling the same way. And that's why, again, in organizations, it's like whispering down the lane. One person starts, and then the next person, oh yeah, it's really terrible. Oh, it's really, really, really bad. And then you've got a whole unhappy group where nobody is standing outside and saying, hey, let's look at this. So I call it my helicopter view. I love to get that what's really happening here?
Yeah.
Where are the dynamics coming from? Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? I was just really having a great time like 2 minutes ago, and now my mood is like really flat. Like,
I'm sorry, did I say something?
Did that come from?
I didn't mean to. No,
no. Sure.
No, I was trying to make a joke. It went over flow. Yeah. No. I am assuming that you've got some tools that help people get to this state. Is meditation in that? Because what I'm hearing a lot of is I feel like has also been slightly been taught for the past 2,000 years, like with Buddhism as well, right? Basically grounding yourself. And if I say it this way, it's going to sound like you're trying to create a sociopathic person, but separating yourself from the problem, separating yourself from the world around you. And I feel like that's kind of in resonance with what I just heard you say about the
That's exactly right. And you wouldn't be a sociopath because a sociopath has no guilt. So that wouldn't apply to you. But what you are talking about, and it is very, very much talked about in spiritual development, just like there's moral development, there's, in terms of children, there's all this age-wise development, there's spiritual development. And with spiritual development, you do get to a certain place where you are much more neutral. You're not as the range is, I mean, it's not, you can't, of course you can have joy, but there's much more of a buffer between what's going on. It doesn't stab you so much in the heart when something happens. You have a lot more distance. And in psychotherapy, they call it the witness or the third eye, where I could be in it, but I'm also noticing and I'm watching it. And that's honestly, Jodah, that's the hallmark of good health. It's not like we don't have feelings. It's just that we don't get swept up in the feelings. Or if we do, that we don't go down so far and we don't stay there so long. And
I feel like that speaks to the whole, again, mindfulness, meditation, cognitive behavioral therapy, stoicism, all of that.
All of that. And good.
Oh, and you have a framework that you teach, right? Mastery under pressure.
Exactly.
That's kind of what your consultancy is really centered around, and it's like you say it's kind of a precursor to leadership development. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what is mastery under pressure?
So, from again my own experience, and then working with so many people over the years, what I'd noticed is the body gets triggered before the mind. And what I talk about it again in this little TED talk that I did was that we have 175 milliseconds from the time an event happens to the time that we're aware that it happens. So it's like half of a blink of an eye. And it happens so fast that we just can get taken away. But as we begin to start to watch what's happening over and over and over and over and over again, oh, I noticed there it is again. It's that same pattern. I just got triggered by the same thing over and over and over again. Now I see it. Okay, so now what can I do about it? And so the way that I started kind of putting this stuff together was, it is about calming down the body first, in my opinion. In my opinion, the two things go together. The mind and the body go very quickly together. But we could tell ourselves, and I think anybody of your listeners could identify, I could tell myself a million times, stop thinking about that. It's obsessive. We don't need to go there. But I can't.
Right.
Because I basically don't know how to stop it. So what I teach is I say it's common knowledge, but not always common practice. Because nobody ever taught you how to do this. And so by quieting down the body, and this is, I think, the easiest way to talk about it. So let's just say that this is your nervous system's capacity for stress. And they call it now the window of tolerance. And as long as I'm in this window, life is okay. I can handle what happens and everything is fine. But as soon as the stress hits your nervous system's capacity for tolerating the stress, then the stress response happens. And when that happens, the fingers get tingly, all the blood rushes to the heart. So, getting us ready for that fight, flight, or freeze. But most importantly, and this is where it's most important for leaders, we can't think clearly. The brain goes offline. And this part of our brain, which is our executive functioning, is hijacked. It's hijacked by the stress hormones, and it's hijacked by all the blood going to the heart to get ready for this fight or flight. So if we don't have good management over that, then it's catch as catch can. Sometimes I can control it. Sometimes I can't control it. Sometimes I get so edgy and somebody pushes me over the line. And it's not like we don't know that we're not supposed to do this. We know.
That's why you always do the 10
That's
count
right.
before you send that email response, right?
Exactly. Take that pause. Think about it, right? So what I like to think about is through the work that we do is build up that capacity for your tolerance. And you can't just wait till the heat of the moment. The great athletes don't wait till the heat of the moment to start getting this mental game kind of working.
Yeah,
So
they practice.
They practice. It's practice and repetition and practice and repetition and practice and repetition. So you're building new neural pathways.
And
So
how does a leader do that? I mean, in a training situation, because it's one thing when it's a scenario and it's kind of artificial and you're kind of doing that kind of practice. I'm also wondering, that's where experience comes in too. Like I can say I've over the years become much better at emotionally regulating myself in times of stress over the years because I've been in so many
Have you, Dan?
situations where I've had
Have
to
you?
do that. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I work in higher education.
Yes.
It's crazy.
But what would happen, Dan, if when you were younger, just you were in your teens or your 20s, or even the kids now, my little grandson is learning how to meditate in school, that you build up this capacity so that when the stress hits, it does not get you crazy. You don't have to wait until you're 50, 60, 70 years old in order to, yes, through experience, I've been through this before. I know what's going to happen. Through age, we do gain wisdom. But if you're younger and you can learn this at an earlier age,
Yeah.
how much ahead would you be?
If only.
It would help. It would help. I think especially for youth today. I mean, we have a societal phenomenon where students and teenagers are experiencing much higher levels of anxiety than ever before. So
Right.
I'm definitely a big advocate for more mindfulness and meditation training
So
in the
that's
schools.
just half of it, right? That's just part of it. Okay, so now that my body is calmer and I'm not getting triggered all over the place, now I have to be able to work with my mind. What about those thoughts that keep rolling? And I have a thing I call it, so I teach focus, relaxation, dealing with negative self-talk, how to visualize, and dealing with fear.
Right. And catastrophizing, right?
That's one of the things that people do when they're scared, and also with their thinking. So I like to call it, instead of positive thinking, I like to call it productive thinking. Do my thoughts produce something useful for me? So as soon as I begin to start to catch how I'm thinking about something, well, now I have a pathway. Okay, this is making me feel really crappy. I'm just really going down the spiral here. Is this helping me? Again, it's having that level of distance. I'm just kind of watching how I'm talking to myself. We talk to ourselves worse than we would talk to any family member or any other human being in the world. Oh, I can't believe
it's
it.
pretty
I talk to
horrific,
Jodah
honestly, how he talks to me. It's like I'm glad it's not recorded.
Behind the scenes,
it's in this is interesting. You bring this up because we had a discussion yesterday around growth mindset and the concepts behind that, and there was a mental image taken of the brain scanned when people were addressed with an issue or a problem, and the scans seemed to demonstrate. I mean, it could be argued that you could take other things away from it, but it seemed to demonstrate how the neural networks of the brain, when you thought the way that you were saying, where you saw problems not as endings but opportunities. How can I learn from this? That the neural networks opened up, the brain actually got more blood to it. You could see it where if they came at it with, oh no, crisis, it's over, it's done, I'm not even going to think about how solving, that the neural networks actually started to shrink. It actually would calcify, and they got like these images that actually kind of show the physical processes that occurred by the way you're thinking.
That's right. That's exactly right. Because different areas of the brain get affected by the way we think. When the brain gets hijacked and you haven't really done this work to process it, it just kind of goes haywire. and then everything shuts down. And so, yes, you could see this on brain scans.
And so you have a concept called cut, reframe, and respond. That's part of your model. Can you talk a little bit about
Sure,
that? What
my little,
is that approach?
it's my little magnet, that anybody wants one. But I did this again in my TEDx talk. I was trying to think of something that I could give the audience in a short little piece that they could take away, that it wasn't just me telling my story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, again, sat and thought about how do I do this? Well, when I get triggered and I can feel sort of my, body starting to kind of tighten up in my shoulders and things get hot and I just stop. So it's cut. You just stop what you're doing. Just stop and look around and start to figure out. So the reframe is I start to notice what's happening. How am I talking to myself? What are the feelings and the sensations that are running through my body? Part of knowing a lot about your own body is there are certain feelings that show up in different places. In yoga, they call it the chakras, and in Chinese medicine, it's the meridians. But basically, I think very much in terms of chakras. So there's a lot of emotion that gets stuck in certain places. And if I can identify where that is in my own body, that already gives me a clue. So if it's in my gut, it's like, what am I scared about? Or if it's in my heart, like, where did somebody hurt me? Or if it's in my throat, it's like, what do I need to say that I don't want to say? And so again, you learn, that's part of what I teach, is really how you get into your own body. So it's just a shortcut. So cut, reframe, kind of put the stuff together, and you slow things down as if you're editing a movie. It goes frame by frame by frame. Oh, I can see now this helicopter view. I can see the pieces. Yeah. Okay. And then the last part of it is respond. It's that taking that breath and choosing how you respond rather than just reacting and giving you the same old. And if people practice that, and it's real, I've had a lot of fun with it. People have kind of watched my talk, and one of my friends' husbands, who's a sweetheart, but can be a little difficult, he said, how does that go? Is that cut? Yeah. What am I supposed to do? So it's a
respond, cut, reframe. Yeah. Mixes it up.
Yeah.
I do wonder, like, as someone who may have a tendency for rumination at times, I can see where it could be very difficult, that first step of stop, right? Like something's going on at work. It's very emotionally impactful for whatever reason. And you just get in the cycle of just thinking about it. And you could be aware, like, I am ruminating. I know I've spent the last hour with a glass of wine ruminating. How do you get to that point of stopping? Are there techniques?
Well, there are techniques. And there's just one of my favorite things was, this was years ago. I was doing that same thing, and I do have a pretty obsessive mind, so I'm quite aware of that. And I was just kind of going on, and I could not stop it. And I said to myself, "Okay, Tina, if you came to see you, what would you do?" And so one of the things is there is this tapping, this emotional freedom technique, it's called. So basically, it kind of, they're acupressure points. It starts to calm down the body. Right here on the shoulder blade is another point where if you just tap it, sometimes it quiets down. Right here is another point. Sometimes when I can't sleep and I'm, right here. So again, getting to know some of these techniques that cut out the language and calm down the body. Yeah. And then if I took you through some of these things, you would be like absolutely amazed, because you can't even, like, what was I even thinking about? I don't even.
Oh yeah.
It's fascinating.
I used to have my wife poke me in the temple with a stick.
Did it work?
Oh yeah, it was great. It put me in a state of complete ecstasy. Just tap me in the temple with a stick.
So that's just one way. Other ways
Yeah.
is really kind of pulling it apart. Why am I obsessing on this? What was my part? What was not my part? What can I glean from it? Who do I perhaps need to talk to in order to resolve this? I had a
Right.
situation not too long ago where I did a talk, and at the end of the talk, the woman, there were like, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 people on the screen. And at the end of the talk, the woman didn't even thank me for coming on.
Oh,
And I
that's
just
rude.
was having this wonderful time. And at the end of the thing, I just felt terrible.
Kind of used.
But my first place is, did I do something? Did I say something that offended somebody? Did I, so I because I couldn't resolve it myself, because I didn't have any of the answers, I called this other woman who had brought me, it was, she wasn't the moderator, and she had brought me into the, to do this talk. And she said, no, that same woman had chastised me through I started to answer the chat, and she's said, no, I'm doing the chat. But it was just good to talk about it. And I said,
Right.
I'm not really taking it that personally. I said, but if she's going to do that, she needs to know that was very offensive.
Right.
You don't treat a speaker that way, who's doing it for gratis, yes, to get in front of you.
Especially in that case.
Right. But there's an in-kind trade here. And then I just finished, and I felt so much better. I just let it go. It wasn't mine. It was hers. And that's another thing that we get into so much of really kind of taking on other people's stuff.
Tina,
unconsciously.
So this rumination thing. So if we're trying to get past rumination, and don't get me wrong, I know the word distinctions I'm about to throw out, but I'm curious about how we address this.
Mm-hmm.
You also mentioned in your TED Talk, though, if I remember correctly, about confronting, like straight on, kind of what you just discussed. Like, we're afraid to look at our problems, right? So, and of course, rumination and looking at problems, those are different. But I can see how they can. There's a distinction, and the question is, where does that distinction occur? And I'm wondering if you could speak to that at all.
So one of the things that I know is true for me, and everybody may operate differently, and it behooves you to know how you operate for yourself. When I get stung, somebody tells me something that I didn't really want to hear, or it hurts me, but I actually am responsible for it. I own it. And I will ruminate over that. How did I do that? Why did I do that? What happened? How did I get myself into that situation? For about 24 hours. And then I'm done. And if I'm not done, then it means that there's more work to be done. Then I had a situation with an old friend a couple years ago, and it went south. It was really bad. And the way she reacted and the way she talked to me, and I was so hurt. So again, I just what did I do? What was my part? I found my part. I did find my part. And then after that, we had tried to talk about it, and she was just coming at me. It bothered me because she was an old friend. She was a college friend. Bothered me for a really, really, really long time, until such time I could say, there's nothing more I can do. If this is the way our relationship is going to be, I don't want to be in it. But that about a month later, I was just sitting in my meditation, and I just sent her good wishes because I really did love her, And about an hour later, the phone rang, and she said, "You were never going to call me, were you?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, that incident was not worth our friendship, losing our friendship." And that was it.
Nice.
So it doesn't happen overnight sometimes.
No.
But
nothing ever does.
It's always separating and what's mine, what's not mine. And when it's not mine.
And that can take time to process and to really be able to come to the correct answer about that.
And not a couple things bad about it either, Dan. Not to feel bad that it takes time.
Right.
People have this idea sometimes. I heard one, healer leaders, I can solve something in one visit in 24 hours and you're done. Great.
It's like a sitcom. Solve the problem in 30, well, actually
Counting it.
25 minutes with commercials, right?
So okay, all right. So time takes time, and we're talking about a lot of stuff in the spiritual realm. When I say spirit, the spirit of a person, and the psychology, and the leaders that we work with oftentimes, and I'm going to kind of talk about this from a sense making perspective, have a tendency to be judged themselves and are judged by their bosses by making very fast decisions, right? Acting and being decisive. I think I'm correct in saying that in a traditional sense, producing results,
Producing
right?
results.
And as Dan and I were talking, that, and this is a hypothesis, and it's not necessarily a truth, but I just want to get your take on this, Tina. So in this world of sense making, which is kind of being defined as a post-industrial organization world, but so the sense making organization world, where one is, it's kind of defined by an organization that is looks back on itself more often. It takes in research and looks at itself a little more, and its leaders or its managers or its the people who are running the show are less defined by those things, and would be more defined by creating the narratives and the stories by which everybody gets on board and moves forward, and then the decisions kind of become emergent. Am I kind of structuring that right, Dan? I just want to frame it so I asked the question correctly. It's in that range,
Yeah.
right? And yeah.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, like, if that resonates with you in this world, and if you could put color on that a little bit, if you have anything, Tina. But how do you think, when you're dealing with your managers today, these leaders today, does any aspect of the sense making kind of definition I just gave you affect the way they judge themselves, where they see themselves now? Are you seeing anything where they're having to recalculate their own worth and value based upon a phase shift transition, perhaps, of an organization than what was?
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly, Dan. I mean, Jodah, if I'm going to answer your question, but what has happened over the last X number of years is the leaders traditionally would have layers of people that would save them from anybody else. No, you can't speak to us. You can't speak to, you got this layer and this layer and this layer. So that there was very much of a hierarchy, and they were very difficult to get in touch with and didn't show up very much on the floor or with other people. Now, this younger generation, it's not just the younger generation, it's more human, I believe, is looking for something else from their leaders. They're looking for them to be authentic. They're looking for them to be real. They're looking for them to be, how is your family, and interactive, and for somebody who comes from this, I've always been protected, and this, just going back to that crease on a pair of pants of what it's like to be a leader, how much of myself do I show? What do I lose if I show too much? If I'm sitting and crying with everybody, are they going to respect me? And it's just like a parent, when the parents don't hold the space, the kids get to feel very unsafe. So the leader has to hold the space. They might not always have the answers, but they do have to be confident and comfortable enough in themselves, or at least portray that you can count on me. I've got your back.
Right.
I don't know how we're going to get out of this thing, but we're going to do it together, and I'm going to help you do this, and so on. And so and that's why, again, for the leaders that I work with, I call myself this trusted advisor, because it's a very difficult place to hold, because they're human, and it's also very lonely at the top because they don't have anybody to talk to be able to cry, and get down on their, this is really terrible. My family, things are falling apart, or I'm scared to death, or I'm suffering from depression, or any of these things. So it's a very, very difficult position to hold. So
I could see that. I could see that within the industry I work in, which is higher education. And the higher you go up the administrative leadership ladder, the smaller that group of peers is that you can talk to.
Right.
To the point, like if you're a president of a college, the only other peer you have is another president of a college.
That's
So
right.
you don't really have anyone within your organization probably that you can truly confide to.
That's right.
And so it can be, definitely it speaks to the loneliness of leadership positions, and to, where you spoke about with the crease aspect too, that there are people who are going to really like you as a leader, and there are people who are going to want to, tear you down. And how do you manage that situation? Because it's a true situation. I was doing some coaching with a colleague of mine yesterday, actually, where we were talking about this, and I told her it's kind of like part of the goes with the job when you're in a leadership position. The staff below you that you're supervising are going to have criticisms. They need space to vent those criticisms. They might not be right. Often it's because they don't have enough information. They're not
Mhm.
understanding the full picture. They're not at that balcony view or that helicopter view. So they have different narratives that form. But when you're in the leadership position, you have to have the resilience to be able to take those criticisms. Otherwise, you're not going to be effective. You're not going to survive.
You will not survive. So some of the great leaders that I've worked with and things that I've seen and kind of watched them in organizations that I've been in, they work with core values.
Mm-hmm.
That those values are just really honed. And yes, sometimes they may be unpopular, and many times
Yeah.
they are very popular, but they're really non-negotiable. And those are the people that certainly I've respected, that I've worked with, and I know that they command respect. And so it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you have to know everything or be smart or make those right decisions. Um, again, I think great leaders sometimes make they're capable of making very quick decisions because they can see the whole picture and they're kind of up on their stuff. But they also need to know when, if I make this decision right now, I don't have all the information, and that would be a deadly thing to do.
Yeah, we've been talking about that during this podcast. How much information do you really need in order to make a decision? And there's an art to that,
Oh, for
and
sure.
also
Science.
a level of
It's both. It's both. Yeah, I mean,
a little bit of a science.
you gotta balance the two. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to
Yeah,
get
yeah, yeah.
through very, very, very quickly. And then sometimes I know for me, if I'm not getting a clear yes for myself, that's when I better say, I need to get back to you tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, and people gonna get frustrated with that, and I know people do get frustrated with, like, why is this decision taking so long? The more complex the decision, and the more
Well, the
people
ramifications,
you
you
need
have
to
to be able
talk
to
to.
see the consequences of your
Yeah,
decisions. And if you can't see them and you're walking in blind, you're gonna get slammed, or the
So
possibility
what
is
about
that you're
that
gonna
as
get
well
slammed.
then? And I think in the world we live in today is becoming increasingly ambiguous just in general. But I think it sounds like leaders probably have
Mhm.
to own that a little more. Do you have any advice or thoughts around that, where you're making decisions based upon what you don't know, or what you tribal experiences? And I think that what they have to live with.
So, I mean, I think the pandemic was just a perfect example for everybody,
mm-hmm.
because learning to live in that level of uncertainty is pretty uncomfortable. And yet that is what we've all been required to do.
Yeah,
Right. And so the great leaders that are completely aware of that level of uncertainty and meeting it head on and making decisions that are perhaps incremental or with the hopes that it's going to go a certain way, but also being agile, that when something's not working,
Yeah.
that they can
you can change it.
shift.
Yeah, being adaptable. Yeah, I agree with you. I think the COVID epidemic is a great training ground, probably for the rest of the century. Because I honestly, my thesis is that the uncertainty and ambiguity of the world in which we live, and the complexity of the world, is not going to get any easier. It's probably just going to get worse, and we just got to learn the skills and the mental frameworks to be able to navigate this new ever increasing complex world full of continuous change better. I don't know, I don't know what that means really necessarily at the end of the day, what that picture looks like 20 or 30 years from now, but it's my sense that we're not,
Well,
we're
I
not.
think kind of what you guys are up to, and I'm sure the guests that you have, and I think one of the things that it has taught us is the humanness. When the pandemic hit, I was part of a small, like a mastermind group, a small group, and we used to meet once a month. And then when the pandemic hit, we met once a week, and we stayed really close. And I felt like that group of people got me through the pandemic, because otherwise I'd have been completely isolated. Maybe a client, but in terms of support, in terms of that level of caring and sharing, and got us all through it, really. And so how you create that like this in this kind of environment, because we're not going back at 5 days a week.
So, and so
Yeah,
with
that's one
that,
example.
and with this sort of the world we're in, where the work and the life have been hoisted upon each other in ways that hadn't been in the past because of this new technology. I have a question to ask, and that is, and this is for leaders primarily. I'm curious what your thoughts are around the leaders, because leaders, again, and I come from Silicon Valley, where leaders' lives are their projects, right? Or you have the founder's spirit, and it just becomes everything. Kids and wives and husbands get shortchanged sometimes in those stages. I'm going to ask one simple question: what does work-life balance mean today for a leader?
Well, I don't know that there's one right answer, because we all have to live in our own skin. And I know what it means to me. I know what it means to the leaders that I've worked with. I have a series that I'm doing. It's called Under the Hood, where I've interviewed. I've got 4 episodes so far, and each one of them I think is a gem. And one of the questions that I ask is, now that you are in this position, what are the sacrifices that you've had to make? And one of my guests, who was a CTO of a cybersecurity company, said, they're there. My 40th birthday, I was in wherever I was. I wasn't with my family. I wasn't, with my loved ones. Something really important. But he said, when I'm with my kids, I'm with my kids. And no interruptions, no telephones, no nothing. He just gave a beautiful example of how he has figured this out for himself, in terms of how he ends the day, how he begins the day, and the time that he carves out. We worked together for a good 6 months. He hardly ever missed an hour. He said that his favorite time was when he would just sit back and be with Tina. And that became a value.
What do you think it is about that? Because I could, because we've talked about the isolation of people at certain levels of the leadership ladder. What is it that they're seeking from someone like you when they set up these this time with you?
I think it goes back to what we were talking about. I am somebody that I don't repeat. It's a safe place. And so anything that's going on in somebody's life, whether it's personal, professional, team-wise, and he said to me, I don't need you to help me with the technical part. He said, I've got a whole slew of people that are working. He said, I need your help with the interpersonal part.
Yeah.
And that's really that's my territory. Again, strategically.
I think a lot of leaders struggle with the interpersonal part, in my experience.
It's
probably one of the primary criticisms I hear about people in leadership positions, that they're difficult to work with, or they're distant, or they're not connecting with people on an emotional level. And especially during the pandemic, I think people were really craving that.
Yes. Yes. And so we want to make it, it's this whole thing. I think maybe I told you guys when we talked before, but right before the pandemic, somebody who was a CEO of a company said, what you do, it's really interesting, but it's not urgent. And now it is urgent and important. mental health is urgent and important. And in terms of this work-life balance and knowing yourself really well and how you manage yourself and how you solve problems. And I think one of the questions that you had put on the form, but you didn't ask particularly, but why do I think that this work is the precursor to great leadership? Because there are people that do great leadership, team building, purpose, passion, all the things that go on in a company, all the operations and who talks to who and siloing and this and that. I don't do that. I do the part that goes on between here and here. And I think, and I really kind of think of us, this is a fine instrument. And if you get this instrument working at a high level, then you're the person that comes out to be with the teams, and you're the person who comes into the organization, and you're the person that people want to hang around because you have this level of calm and cool and collected and presence, and then everything else.
And radiate positivity and enthusiasm. And and I agree with you. My running theory on leadership really is that it's an exercise in consciousness, right? And not just mindfulness, but I mean your consciousness.
That's right.
You have to develop your consciousness, and consciousness is not contained just within the brain. It is it extends to your body and the environment around you. And you're leading other people's consciousnesses as well to a goal.
So to go back also, Dan, to one of the questions you asked in terms of how I got through, some of the difficult times. When I got breast cancer, I had been I had moved into New York, and I was there for 2 months, and then I got breast cancer and had to close my practice and do all kinds of things. But basically, somebody gave me it was Andrew Weil's book, The 9 Things for Healing. And I don't remember what the first 8 were, but the 9 was you do whatever it takes. You just do whatever it takes. So for me, that was mind, body, spirit, and emotion. The way I thought, what I put in my mouth, how I dealt with myself, how I dealt with people, just around that clock over and over and over and over and over again. And then, when I moved and I would go to other doctors, and they said, "Oh, you did really well. You had metastatic cancer. How did you do that?" No, they never asked me how I said, "Do you want to know how I did it?" And they said, it didn't fit into their model. So, but I think in terms of leadership, whether it's through crises or whatever it is, if we go back to that mind, body, spirit, and emotion in terms of what work-life balance means for somebody, because we are not designed to work like founders 24 hours a day, 80 hours a week over long periods of time. We're not designed that way.
So I know we're coming up at the end of the hour. Jodah, do you have something?
It was great. I could talk for another hour, but
it has
got to
been
be
great.
Respectful of some time here too.
Well, I have one more question for you, Tina. Well, 2, and I'll get to the second one, but kind of to start to wrap up here. What do you feel like is your greatest leadership consulting success? Is there one particular client that you've really felt you helped transform their leadership approach?
So one of them comes to mind. Again, I've been doing this for 39 years, so I've worked with a lot of people. But the one who comes to mind is another fellow that I had on my under the hood, and I've known him for years. And he works at Deloitte. I mean, we can say that for sure. And he kept getting passed over for promotions and things that he wanted to do and things that he thought he was really kind of qualified to do. And so we would talk a lot about his disappointments and why he didn't get this and why he didn't get that. Fast forward many years, he was always interested in leadership. I mean, that's where he would shine. He's not great with detail, and the things that he got passed over were the things that they knew he wasn't great at. And what we started to work on together was him being much more assertive about the areas that he felt like he could really shine and what responsibilities he wanted to take on and things that he would volunteer for and leadership things and kind of handling panels and speaking and so on. And now, these many years into his career, that's what he's doing. And he's just grateful and happy, and got a beautiful family. And, again, I know a lot of the inside track of all the things that he struggled with, but he was definitely one of my great successes, and I'm very proud of him.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nice. And so where can people contact you, Tina? How do they get a hold of you?
Tina at masteryunderpressure.com. That's my email. Anything Mastery Under Pressure, you'll find me. I also have a quiz. It's masteryunderpressure.net, where you can take a quiz on these 5 different areas that I talked about. I have a brand new website. It's masteryunderpressure.com. I'm real proud of that. I think it speaks to a lot of the things that we talked about today.